Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, will come a waltzing Matilda with me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Arnie Luke's at the Crossroads. Another day, another forum. And I'd like to welcome our guest from Adelaide, Betty Lukes.
Morning, Arnie, and thank you.
And from Canada, Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wally.
Good evening, both of you.
Something about the direction of the sun. Isn't it wonderful, eh? Isn't it wonderful that we've got this beautiful world and our place in the heavens to think about? Okay, well, what I'd like to bring up today, I'm gonna actually have to just do a screen capture while I'm doing it. So please excuse me while my eyes go elsewhere. But what I wanted to talk to you today was about systems and how systems can be for the good or they can be to brutalise people. And I'm going to go across here and bring up our first window. And our first window is to do with Weary Dunlop and his book, The War Diaries. And he wasn't not able to actually begin writing these diaries until 40 years after the war had concluded. And that was because the brutality of the war was just so vivid, and it had to heal, and at that time of healing, so that he could look on it and then actually write his book about it. And what he does is he points out that the Japanese soldier was a formidable enemy, but he was also a brutalized soldier, and it was a system of brutality meted down to the soldier that of course transferred across to the enemy and the prisoners of war, and how systems that were in place at the time actually caused that outworking. Now, I want to bring up some articles I saw in today's ABC News, and to me these demonstrate systems where you may not agree or disagree with it, but the point is that they brutalise people, and some are actually even our whole philosophy about whether it's appropriate for us to even think about systems and how they may or may not brutalise people and how some people can take advantage of it. The first one is the work for the dole, the unemployment benefits, or to pay off fines. You do community service. And this article is about in regard to harming people, the people who are actually having to do the work for the dole or to pay off their fines doing community service. The second article, again ABC News, is about the basic income trial in Finland and how it shows that there's this welfare dilemma, people receiving something for nothing, and how it essentially places the worker, those who pay tax, against those who are not working or those who are receiving a benefit. And so it essentially polarises people. I think it's very important to understand the policy and the method that they're using to actually separate us into warring tribes, if you like. And the third article is digital nomads and the tax. Is it an ethical lifestyle? And what really pricked my mind on this was the ethics, the word ethics, as if there's some sort of moral assessment, one party looking at another party and making a moral assessment of their lifestyle. And right down the end, I won't go through it, there's different people there, different circumstances, but it makes mention of Paradise Island. Now, Paradise Island was the island in the story of Pinocchio, and it's where the children went to live, all those who didn't want to be responsible. And so it was it's an interesting story, and it paints a moral picture, but is it valid? And I think that we need to actually look at this whole thing of systems and the validity or morality of it, and is it ethical or right for us to make choices for other people. So I'm going to open the floor and let our Canadian guest Wally take the floor. Wally.
Well, of course, Arnie Douglas in his first book, Economic Democracy, made it very clear. Systems are made for men and not men for systems. In other words, systems have an ability to perform functions which may be useful to humans, but they shouldn't dominate humans. Humans should derive benefit from them, and their freedom should be enhanced by the operation of the system. The system should not specify what the human is and what the human should do. The system is just like a tool. It's a tool. It is useful, and it should be regarded simply as that, not as a system of controlling the individual, but literally of emancipating the individual.
Okay, thanks for that, Wally. I'm going to go straight to Betty. Betty, your thoughts, please.
Well, I'm also thinking of it from the point of view we've discussed the Chinese what we call social discredit by a communist capitalist system, and the Douglas social credit, which of course is based on the Christian philosophy, Christian teaching, and they're two systems that are diametrically opposed, and we need to see the difference between the two. And Christianity, of course, has been getting a very bad press lately, and yet the Christian concepts played a huge role in the development of Western culture. And that's what I want to look at as we go on today. And
Okay, can I stop you there, Betty? I just want to, as soon as I find my mouse, there it is. I just want to cut across to something here, and that is, in a sense, I'm actually going to more or less touch on the Old Testament and the New Testament, and this business of envy. Now, Peterson talks about Pleasure Island, he talks about Pinocchio, and he talks about the Marxist pathology, and that is one of envy, that if someone has, doesn't matter where they are in the food chain, they can be in a life of is actually considered opulence, in a life of opulence, but if someone has more than they do, they have this view of envy towards that person, and that's why they're essentially Marxist orientated. And I find that fascinating, this envy thing, because we have trouble looking at ourselves. Okay, back to you, Betty.
Well, that's an important point, Arnie, because but I want to go back in history so that the viewer knows where I'm coming from. And of course, slavery was a leading feature of earlier civilizations, and it was throughout the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire into Anglo-Saxon times. And it was spoken before about the slave trade in the 1800s in the campaign of William Wilberforce and his associates to ban the slave trade in England. And those who believed slavery was inconsistent with the witness of St. Augustine, one of the early Christian saints, who said, God did not make man to lord it over his fellows. And again he said, the desire to rule over our equals is an intolerable lust of the soul. And that's what we're seeing around the world at the moment, if you think about it. Those who are doing their best to work towards the new world order, the one world government, they have an intolerable lust of the soul.
Okay.
And
I'll cut across you now. Thanks for that, Betty. I'm just going to give Wally the floor and present your thoughts, Wally.
Well, yes, I think that Douglas often referred to it as the will to power, of course, meaning the will to power over your fellow man. And that is Dennis Byrne, who was one of Douglas's confidants and one of the original social creditors. He wrote an essay and said that everyone has a personal relationship with his God, and that anyone who tries to interfere in that relationship is committing a sacrilege. In other words, we are beings which are created by non-human elements. There is something higher than the human aspect. And when people take it upon themselves, and we yield to people to allow them to exercise their power over us, we're forgetting that real power comes not from individuals, from humans, but from the source of life, whatever that source is, whatever you call it, God, whatever. It's something that exists within the universe that is far superior to mankind. And so we should not, lest any man should boast. We should not allow ourselves to become self-important to the point that we think we are the author of life. We are not.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's very important point. This self-assessment. We can't actually come to grips with who we are, what we are, for other people. We can only come to grips with who we are, what we are for ourselves. We've got to look at ourselves first and put it in order. Betty Luke's.
Well, Arnie, you showed a picture of those who were working for the dole or paying off fines, and they were working to do that, and really they were working for the means of life, but they were being directed. Now I can't see much difference to that to what happened in history, and Bishop Wolfston, towards the end of the 11th century, protested against the slave trade, and it was centred then in Bristol, around near where he lived. It was the slaves or serfs who cultivated the soil. The cowherd and the ploughman and their progeny, often attached to the soil, were sold with the soil, and they were the most valuable part of the stock. That's what they were seen as, and their pedigrees were carefully kept. Can you imagine that? Now, I can't see too much, certainly more sophisticated and all the technology today, but I can't see much difference in that than what they're doing to us now with their mass surveillance and the records they're keeping. Come on, we're looking at the same thing. It's just in a different era. But Christian teaching slowly permeated the people's thoughts over the centuries, and the Christian sense of equality is an entirely different sense of equality to what we're seeing at the moment. And it was this equality of human nature passed into the texture of English thought and language and became a leading principle in the law. And human nature, well, Solzhenitsyn put it very well when he said the line between good and evil goes through the heart of every man and woman, of course. And we do understand that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So one of the things that happened over the centuries is that the pyramidal structure of a state was deconstructed. But it took centuries, but it did happen. And now, of course, you see that pyramidal structure in the communist states because that's how it works. And that's what they're trying to do to us. But one of the earliest indications of the new spirit that had come into the world is found in St. Paul's letter to Philemon. And that was about AD 55. And Paul appealed to his fellow Christian to take back his runaway slave as a beloved brother, not as a slave, as a beloved brother. And that indicated this new spirit. And this to me is the spirit that Wally is talking about. And if you go to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, it speaks of, or it says, we are all Christ's creatures and brethren of one blood, alike beggars and earls and kings also. In other words, there was not equality of outcome, but there certainly began with the understanding that we all share the same human nature, and power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, as the pyramidal structure shows, and Wally and C.H. Douglas showed that very well in the pyramid of power. Well worth looking at these things. He speaks of it in Economic Democracy. So it was well understood 100 years ago, but we've lost sight of it.
All right, no worries. Thank you for that, Betty. That's you've covered a lot of ground there, and we'll have to, if you like, assess each point one at a time. Wally Klinck.
Well, of course, let nobody be deceived. We are slaves today. There is no doubt about it. We have a lot of creature comforts, but our time and our thoughts and our efforts are really directed in a very centralized and domineering way. Our young people are conscripted into the armed services because they have nowhere else to go. They're looking for some kind of security. They are sent off to kill and be killed with terrible consequences, not only physical consequences, but very, very devastating psychological consequences. The suicide rate amongst American military is really quite distressing. It's quite significant, and in numbers. And so you can see that there's something that is very unhealthy going on. It's very unhealthy. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you're aware of the American commentator Wolf Blitzer. Apparently he made a comment, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that it was really good for the economy that the military, suppliers of military armaments and so on, were able to feed the conflict in not in the Middle East, in one of those countries just beside Saudi Arabia.
Yemen.
Yes, of course, Yemen. That's what I'm trying to remember. And now, isn't that an incredible thing? He said that it is very good for the economy. I mean, this is the abomination that maketh desolate. I mean, it surely must indicate that there is either a state of insanity or a state of unspeakable evil, that anyone should actually consider this to be a desirable thing.
Thank you, Wally. That's quite a profound observation. I did see that in this morning's round of emails, and yes, when you start looking at it, that it's simply profits. You're blowing a country up, and there's profits, and it's hang on a hello. Is this what it's all about? Is this why we're here? Is this our greater calling? I don't think so. Betty Lukes.
Well, what did Douglas have to say about that? I think in Social Credit, he observed that the state took somebody to task or to trial who murdered one person, and yet the state glorified war and the mass killing. And that's exactly what has happened in that report, American report. And of course, not meaning to criticize Mr. Jordan Peterson that much, but he's the one who defended the right of those with a high IQ to reach to the top of their tree or the top of their profession without taking into account that just having a high IQ doesn't make you a human being, and that morals and ethics came into it too. And this is why, what we're endeavoring to show is what you see on television or hear on radio. There's more to it than what you're being brainwashed with.
Thank you, Betty. I think that's most important. And where we're coming to, as I'm listening to this conversation, this forum take its own direction, is that what is sadly lacking, what is this void that's in the community that's not there, is the if you like, the moral position of the church. And it should be blowing trumpets as to we are heading in the wrong direction. It should be blowing trumpets to say that this Middle East carnage is immoral. It's immoral. The purpose of industry is to provide goods and services to people, not to deliver bombs to Yemen in order to balance the books. It's immoral. And the fact is, there's a void there. And in this void comes this bloke from America who says, well, it's good for the economy if we're doing this. And there's nothing to take the place of that except this barbarity, really. It's nothing less than that. Wally Klinck.
Well, of course, it simply means that there's a worship of the doctrine of salvation through works, not through grace. Nothing comes from nothing. Everything must be earned, and it doesn't matter how you earn it. As long as you earn it, you are justified morally, presumably, which is a completely erroneous position. It's illogical. It's immoral. It makes absolutely no sense. And it comes about because we have not ensured that each individual is a recipient of his rightful inheritance. There is a gross difference between incomes that are earned and incomes that are received. Nature provides so many things for us that are free, but in our economy, we simply don't recognize that. Everyone has to work. They have to justify their existence by serving under some system or some individual or group of individuals. And that is a form of slavery. It is contrary to natural law because in nature you do not generally see that sort of thing. Individuals in nature tend to go around, they do congregate and they operate together, but they operate as individual units according to what they are, not according to what someone tells them what to be or forces them or compels them what to be. And we have literally stepped out of nature right into a state of tyranny, quite frankly. And it's psychological, there's no need for it because the actual potential for abundance and for economic security is more than existent. It's just what we think and what governs our behavior that makes it so that we don't realize those benefits. And it's really a tremendous tragedy, and it's something that we have, for instance, you're talking about the guaranteed income. Well, the guaranteed income, yes, guaranteed income is a recognition that people need a degree of economic security. But the problem is that the guaranteed income, as it's been proposed as something to be financed by taxation, is taking away something from someone else and giving it to another person. In other words, it's just shifting things around. It doesn't increase the pie. It doesn't increase it doesn't provide for inheritance, much less recognize or increase it. It's simply, it's done in circumstances where nobody really has enough in the first place because there isn't enough purchasing power for people to buy what's being produced. So if you go and try to take money away from others and redistribute it, you're not helping the situation. You may be changing it a little bit, but you're not solving the problem at all. You can't make a sufficiency out of an insufficiency by redistributing the insufficiency. And that's why the guaranteed income, I think in Finland, I heard it discontinued. Mm-hmm. But in any case, it's simply not viable. It's not viable because it simply puts a load, it shifts the load on the economy, a load that is already far too great because of the amount of debt that is required to carry the economy because of our lack of purchasing power.
Thank you, Wally. That's very important. And the basic income, I think, was actually designed to fail. It was always designed to fail. It never intended to actually resolve the issue. And look at the fact that we have robotics, automation, advanced control, nuclear energy in the form of power, electricity, the production that one man does in comparison to what one man did 300 years ago. We're not talking long, 300 years ago before the Industrial Revolution. The amount of production that one man is capable of doing with robotics and machinery is mind-boggling. And here we are, we have an insufficiency and we have an indebtedness to the financial system to the tune of, at the moment, currently $3 years of production of the entire world is owed to the bankers, the central bankers, 3 years production of the entire world. And that means that while we're producing non-stop everybody for the next 3 years and hand it all over to the central bankers, the entire world's production for 3 years handed over to central bankers, we're still incurring costs. And those costs are the actual costs of running industry. And that's madness. The whole world is in debt to these people. The whole world. 3 years production. Every single thing. I mean, come on. We've lost sight of what the real world is about here. Betty Lukes.
Again, I'm going back in history. And this time, those who like cowboy movies will relate to what I'm saying. There's a book called Glanville, and it speaks of the free and lawful man as already an institution in this time. And it reads, the King's writs regularly orders the shire reeve, that's the sheriff, to summon so many free and lawful men to determine a matter of fact in dispute between the parties to litigation. Now, that's going back to the origins of common law. This is how common law developed. It was based on what was the decision of the courts between two parties and who were in conflict. Well worth understanding common law as opposed to statute law. And in the 14th century, in the presence of this noble conception of man, slavery ceased in Britain. In England before the end of the 12th century, that which was called slavery in the old Roman sense was extinguished already. And Henry Bracton had this to say, the natural law for him and his time was the reflection of the divine wisdom in the mind and life of reasonable creatures and a first principle of morals. Huh? First principle of morals? Well, I think that modern man better have a look at that, because it's one thing to be a smart cookie, to have a high IQ, but it's another thing to use that brain for better purposes.
Thank you, Betty. That's a beautiful summary, and I think we've covered some good ground today. We're up to 28 minutes, and I'd like to just propose we do one last lap to bring this issue home. Wally Klinck.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it doesn't. Pure intelligence does not mean morals or ethics. It does not mean love. It does not mean kindness. As you said, it does not mean being human. You've heard of the evil genius, and I'm quite sure there are many, many psychopaths out there who are very, very smart. They would score highly on the IQ test. So it's a question, I think, of morals, yes. But morals, I think, really valid morals derive from love. It's from an instinctive feeling about your fellow man. It's something that you recognize as a kinship, as a commonality of some kind of a harmony. And it's difficult because words can't really describe some of these things. But I think it is something that is, for lack of a better word, divine.
Beautiful. Thank you, Wally. And Betty Lukes, your last comments, please.
Yes, well, as a mother, I'm reminded of what Jeffrey Dobbs had to say about that when he wrote about the power, what power actually was. And he pointed out how a mother has really just about complete power over a born child, even an unborn child. And the thing that motivates her is her love.
Beautiful. Thank you, Betty. I'm going to just direct our viewers. Thank you, forum members, first of all, but I want to direct our viewers to the website, thecrossroads.org, and you'll see here that we've got our videos as we produce them. They're all there. and you'll find them. You'll also find them on our YouTube channel, Douglas Social Credit, The Policy of Freedom. Now, the last part I'd like to take you to is this, the ALOR library here. And in the library, you'll find the writings of Jeffrey Dobbs. There they are under Dobbs in the middle column, and then, of course, Douglas immediately after. And there's a wealth of information. There's been hundreds, thousands of hours of work to prepare this library, repository of information and knowledge that's available to you to resource. And it's our pleasure to bring it to you as we do it in our leisure. Arnie looks for the crossroads. Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, will come a waltzing Matilda with me. Good morning.